Let's begin with a phenomenon that, by all logic, shouldn't be occurring, yet it's unfolding before our eyes. The next era of mobility, the electrification of transport that was destined to be an American achievement, is instead being constructed in Canada. We're not talking about a handful of cars or a token assembly plant. This is the complete architecture of an industrial transformation. The battery manufacturing, the vehicle assembly lines, the nationwide charging grids, and the intricate supply chains that will dictate how we move for the next half-century. If you had suggested to anyone 5 years ago that Ontario would eclipse Texas and Nevada as the electric vehicle epicenter of North America, while Tesla trimmed its U.S. operations and dismissed thousands of employees, they would have dismissed you as utterly detached from reality. The electric vehicle was America's modern-day moonshot. Tesla broke the technological ground. American consumers created the demand. The United States possessed the innovative spark, the investment capital, and the visionary ambition to steer the global shift away from fossil fuels. Yet that position of leadership is currently disintegrating. The cause is not a failure of engineering or the natural forces of the market. It is a matter of political choice. Specifically, the choices made under the Trump administration to abolish the $7,500 federal tax incentive for EV buyers, to prohibit the use of Chinese-origin minerals in battery construction, and to reduce funding for charging infrastructure by a staggering 90%. These decisions, defended as necessary to shield American manufacturing and lessen reliance on China, have produced precisely the opposite outcome. They have placed electric vehicles out of financial reach for the average American, paralyzed the battery supply chain, and abandoned the charging network in a state of incompletion and unreliability. Meanwhile, Canada, identifying a historic, once-in-a-generation opening, has acted with remarkable decisiveness to establish itself as the continent's electric vehicle nexus. They are doing far more than attracting factories. They are constructing an entire integrated ecosystem, from mines and refineries to battery cell plants, vehicle assembly halls, and charging infrastructure that will energize clean transportation for generations. And the workforce, the engineers who dedicated their professional lives to advancing battery science, the assembly line workers who put vehicles together, the technicians who erected charging stations, are discovering a harsh truth. Even the industries representing the future can pack up and move when government policy renders them unsustainable. When that happens, entire economic destinies are relocated alongside them. What occurred officially appears clear-cut in legislative text, but the repercussions have been profound. In early 2025, President Trump signed the American Energy Independence Act, a comprehensive law crafted to decrease U.S. dependence on foreign supply chains and defend domestic industry. Its cornerstone was the termination of the electric vehicle tax credit. For more than a decade, Americans purchasing EVs had benefited from a $7,500 federal tax reduction, a critical factor that made electric vehicles price competitive with traditional gasoline cars. The Trump administration contended the credit amounted to corporate welfare for affluent Tesla customers, and that market forces alone should determine EV adoption without government subsidies. The credit was removed in its entirety, effective immediately. The second pillar of this new EV policy took aim at battery production. Modern electric vehicle batteries depend on lithium, cobalt, nickel, and rare earth elements. A substantial share of these minerals, particularly lithium and cobalt, are extracted and processed in China. The Trump policy forbade the use of any Chinese-sourced minerals in batteries for vehicles sold in the United States. Positioned as a national security imperative to avoid reliance on a geopolitical competitor, the policy granted companies a mere 6 months to switch to non-Chinese supply sources. The third component of the legislation gutted financing for EV charging infrastructure. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act passed during the Biden administration had earmarked $7.5 billion to construct a national network of fast charging stations. The Trump administration reallocated 90% of those funds to highway maintenance and fossil fuel infrastructure projects, leaving a paltry $750 million for EV charging, insufficient to complete even a small portion of the envisioned network. The combined effect was nothing short of catastrophic for the American EV sector. Overnight, without the tax credit, EV prices jumped by $7,500. A Tesla Model 3 that had effectively cost $32,000 after the incentive now carried a price tag approaching $40,000. Sales plummeted. In the first fiscal quarter following the credit's elimination, EV sales fell by 60%. Consumers who had been contemplating an electric vehicle opted instead to remain with gasoline-powered cars or purchase used vehicles. Tesla, Rivian, Lucid, and established automakers like General Motors and Ford, which had committed billions to EV production, suddenly confronted a marketplace that had vanished. The mineral ban created an insurmountable supply chain dilemma. Lithium and cobalt mining outside China is limited and comes at a higher cost. Australian lithium is more expensive. African cobalt carries ethical concerns regarding mining practices. And even if companies could source minerals from outside China, the refining capacity, the complex process of converting raw ore into battery-grade material, is overwhelmingly concentrated in China. There simply was not enough non-Chinese refining capability to satisfy American battery manufacturing needs. Companies were forced into a binary choice: halt battery production or move their operations outside the United States. Simultaneously, the collapse of charging infrastructure made EVs an impractical choice for most Americans. Range anxiety, the fear of depleting your battery without a charger nearby, has always been a psychological barrier to EV adoption. The federal charging network was designed to eliminate that fear by guaranteeing fast chargers at regular intervals along major highways. When 90% of its funding vanished, the network plan evaporated with it. Gaps in coverage emerged. Rural regions, already poorly served, became EV deserts. Attempting a long-distance journey in an electric vehicle turned into a logistical puzzle, and consumers, quite understandably, concluded that gasoline cars remained the safer, more reliable option. Tesla was the first to react. The company declared a 60% reduction in production at its Nevada Gigafactory, accompanied by layoffs affecting 8,000 employees. Its Texas facility scaled back expansion blueprints, and quietly, Tesla began investigating possibilities in Canada. GM followed, suspending operations at its Ultium battery plant in Ohio. Rivian postponed its growth plans. Ford dialed back its EV investments. The American electric vehicle industry, poised on the brink of explosive expansion, shifted abruptly into survival mode. While American EV policy was unraveling, Canada was assembling the alternative. Canadian leadership understood a fundamental reality that the Trump administration seemingly missed. Electric vehicles are not a niche product or a luxury for environmentalists. They are the inevitable future of transportation. Every major global automaker is transitioning to electric powertrains. Europe has established legal deadlines to ban new internal combustion engine car sales. China is electrifying its entire automotive fleet. The pivotal question is not whether transportation will electrify, but where the factories, the batteries, and the supporting infrastructure will be constructed. And if the United States was going to make EV production unworkable, Canada was prepared to capture the opportunity. The Canadian government unveiled a $35 billion decade-long investment in electric vehicle infrastructure. It guaranteed the continuation of purchase incentives, 8,000 Canadian dollars per vehicle, keeping EVs affordable for middle-class families. It welcomed Chinese mineral suppliers, permitting Canadian battery manufacturers to source lithium and cobalt from the most economically efficient global sources. It committed $15 billion to building a comprehensive national fast-charging network with stations every 30 kilometers along primary highways. Furthermore, it presented battery manufacturers with a 70% rebate on construction costs. Build a battery plant in Ontario, and the government covers 70% of the capital expense. The response was instantaneous and transformative. Tesla announced plans to construct a massive battery manufacturing complex in Ontario, its largest outside the United States. GM pledged to expand its Canadian EV production footprint. Rivian, which had encountered scaling difficulties in America, inaugurated a factory in Windsor. Northvolt, the Swedish battery powerhouse, selected Ontario for its North American headquarters. Within a year and a half, Ontario had solidified its status as the undisputed epicenter of North American EV production. Let me illustrate what this seismic shift looks like for the individuals experiencing it firsthand. Consider James. He is 37 years old and worked at Tesla's Nevada Gigafactory for 6 years. He began as a production technician on the assembly line constructing battery packs for the Model 3 and Model Y. Over time, he specialized in battery management systems, the sophisticated electronics that monitor and optimize battery performance. He advanced to a senior engineer role, leading a team of 12 focused on next-generation battery technology. He adored his work. It was cutting-edge, intellectually demanding, and he held a profound belief in the mission. Electrifying transportation wasn't just a job, it was a fight against climate change, a reduction of pollution, the construction of a better future. He earned $125,000 annually, owned a home in Reno, had a wife and 2 children, and believed he was forging a career that would endure for decades. In early 2025, his world transformed. Tesla's sales cratered following the elimination of the tax credit. The Nevada factory, once operating at full capacity, began to wind down. Shifts were shortened, overtime vanished. Then the layoffs commenced. First production workers, then administrative staff. In June, James received the call. His entire department was being dissolved. Tesla was consolidating battery research and development, transferring some operations to Texas and others to a new facility being planned in Canada. James was presented with a choice: accept a severance package of 9 months' pay and benefits, or apply for a position at one of Tesla's remaining facilities. However, those facilities were in different states or different countries, with no guarantee of selection. James applied for every available position. He interviewed for roles in Texas, but they were filled by internal transfers. He reached out to Rivian and Lucid, but they were also conducting layoffs, not hiring. He contacted GM, but their battery operations were shutting down. For 3 months, James sent out resumes, clinging to hope. Nothing materialized, and the severance clock continued to tick. Then, James received a call from a recruiter for Tesla's new Ontario battery facility. They were hiring aggressively, seeking experienced engineers versed in large-scale battery production. They offered James a senior engineering position leading a team of 20 working on advanced lithium-ion cells. The salary was $135,000 Canadian dollars, approximately $100,000 USD, less than his Nevada earnings. But the recruiter explained that Ontario's cost of living was lower, healthcare was publicly covered, and the facility was state-of-the-art, superior to anything Tesla operated in the United States. James was torn. Relocating to Canada felt like surrendering on the American dream he had invested in. He had believed in the American EV revolution, yet he also had a family to support and a mortgage to pay. The undeniable reality was that the EV industry in the United States was contracting, while in Canada it was expanding rapidly. If he wanted to continue working in the field he was passionate about, he had to follow the work. James and his family moved to Ontario in September. The transition proved more challenging than anticipated. Ontario was colder. The cultural nuances were different. His children had difficulty adjusting to new schools, but the work itself was extraordinary. Tesla's Ontario facility wasn't merely a copy of the Nevada Gigafactory, it was an evolution. The production lines featured greater automation. The battery technology was more advanced. The team James led included engineers from Tesla's Nevada plant, from GM's Ohio facility, from Rivian's California operations, all drawn to Canada by the same convergence of opportunity and necessity. Within 6 months, James was promoted to lead engineer, overseeing multiple production lines. His salary increased to $160,000 Canadian dollars, about $119,000 USD. It was still less than his Nevada income, but his family was settling in. They purchased a home in a suburb with excellent schools. The healthcare costs that had eroded his Nevada salary were eliminated. And the work, developing battery cells with higher energy density and faster charging capabilities, was among the most thrilling in the global industry. Now let me show you the other side of this monumental shift. For every engineer like James who discovered opportunity in Canada, there are workers in the United States who remained and witnessed their industry disappear. Meet Robert. He is 49 years old and worked at Tesla's Nevada Gigafactory for 8 years. Robert is not an engineer. He is a production worker, one of the individuals who physically assembles battery packs on the factory floor. It is skilled labor requiring training, meticulous attention to detail, and the ability to perform precision tasks in a high-speed environment. Robert excelled at it. He was part of the team that enabled Tesla to scale production from thousands of vehicles annually to millions. He earned $78,000 a year, received full benefits, owned a modest home on the outskirts of Reno, and supported his wife and teenage daughter. When Tesla began scaling back, Robert's hours were the first to be cut, from 5 days a week to 4, then to 3. His income dropped, but he persevered, hoping for a turnaround. Then the layoffs started. Robert watched co-workers, people he had labored beside for years, pack their toolboxes and depart. In June, Robert received his notification. His position was eliminated. Tesla offered 4 months of severance and job placement assistance, but there were no jobs to be found. The entire EV industry in Nevada was shrinking. Robert applied to other manufacturing facilities. He secured 2 interviews. One company offered him a position at $49,000 a year, a 40% pay cut with no benefits. The other never called back. Robert is 49. He devoted nearly a decade to building technology he believed represented the future. Now he faces the likelihood of exiting the industry entirely, perhaps taking a warehouse job or construction work that has no connection to his training or his passion. His mortgage is $1,500 a month. His daughter aspires to attend college. His wife works part-time in retail, which helps, but it isn't sufficient. His severance will be exhausted in 2 months. Robert does not know what comes next, and Robert is not an isolated case. Across Nevada, Texas, and other states that had been building EV infrastructure, thousands of workers are in identical positions. Factories are shrinking or closing. Jobs are evaporating. The promise of a clean energy future has become a casualty of political decisions made hundreds of miles away in Washington. Meanwhile, Ontario is experiencing an economic boom. Tesla's new battery plant employs 12,000 workers. GM's expanded facility has added 8,000 jobs. Rivian's Windsor plant employs 5,000. Northvolt is in the process of hiring 3,000 more. Housing developments are rising. Schools are expanding. Entire communities are being revitalized by the influx of workers and capital investment. The dynamism and forward-looking energy that once defined Nevada's EV sector have relocated north, and they are not returning. The stark contrast between James and Robert unveils a crucial truth about this moment. James, with his specialized engineering expertise, possessed options. He could relocate and rebuild his career in a new country. But Robert, whose skills are valuable yet intrinsically tied to an industry that no longer exists in his region, lacks that same mobility. He is stranded, witnessing the work he devoted years to disappear, with no clear trajectory forward. Now, let's broaden our perspective and examine the structural forces reshaping the EV industry. Comprehending how electric vehicles are manufactured is essential to understanding why the Trump administration's policies were so devastating. Electric vehicles are not simply cars with batteries swapped for engines. They represent a total transformation of the automotive supply chain. Traditional automobiles contain thousands of moving parts, complex engines, transmissions, exhaust systems. Electric vehicles are mechanically simpler but vastly more complex electronically. The battery is the heart of the vehicle, and battery production is the most capital-intensive and technically demanding part of the entire process. A single battery pack contains thousands of individual cells, each requiring precision manufacturing. The raw materials, lithium, cobalt, nickel, must be mined, refined, and processed to exacting specifications. The entire global supply chain, from the mine to the finished vehicle, must be meticulously coordinated. Trump's mineral ban shattered that delicate chain. China dominates not only mining, but more critically, the refining stage. Over 70% of global lithium refining occurs in China. over 80% of cobalt refining. When Trump banned Chinese minerals, he didn't merely block an import. He made it functionally impossible for American battery makers to operate at any meaningful scale. There was insufficient non-Chinese refining capacity to meet demand. Companies would have been forced to spend billions and wait 5 to 10 years to construct new refineries. In the interim, battery production within the United States became commercially unviable. Canada adopted a fundamentally different strategy. Its leadership recognized that the objective should not be to eliminate Chinese involvement entirely, but to build robust domestic capacity while maintaining pragmatic access to global supply chains. Canada invested heavily in lithium mining within Quebec and Ontario, regions with significant mineral deposits. It built new refining capacity, at times partnering with Chinese firms to facilitate technology transfer. It allowed battery manufacturers to source materials from the most economically sensible global origins, provided they adhered to strict environmental and labor standards. The outcome was a battery supply chain that was both globally competitive and strategically resilient. The elimination of the tax credit demolished consumer demand. Electric vehicles remain more expensive to manufacture than gasoline cars, at least at current production volumes. The tax credit was the essential mechanism that made them affordable for middle-class buyers. Without it, EVs reverted to being luxury items, accessible only to wealthier consumers. When demand collapsed, the factories that had been tooling up for mass production suddenly faced a vanished market. Tesla, which had been on a rapid growth trajectory, was forced to contract. GM, which had pledged to electrify its entire lineup, had to delay those plans indefinitely. The American EV market, formerly the world's second largest after China's, became stagnant. Canada maintained and even enhanced its purchase incentives. Electric vehicles stayed affordable. Sales continued their upward climb. Manufacturers, observing a stable and expanding market, invested with confidence. The charging infrastructure gap exacerbated America's problem. Without a reliable, comprehensive network, consumers rationally feared being stranded. That powerful psychological barrier kept them purchasing gasoline cars. Canada treated its charging network as essential public infrastructure, akin to highways, funded by the government and accessible to all citizens. Within 2 years, one could drive an electric vehicle across Canada with confidence. The same could absolutely not be said for travel across the United States. You deserve better than this. You deserve leadership that comprehends the transition to clean energy demands, long-term investment, stable policy frameworks, and pragmatic supply chain management. James deserves better. Robert deserves better. The thousands of workers who built America's EV industry, only to see it relocate to Canada, deserve better. Canada did not steal America's electric vehicle future. Canada constructed a viable alternative because American policy deliberately made EV production unviable within its own borders. The termination of tax credits, the mineral ban, the infrastructure cuts, all were justified with rhetoric about energy independence and protecting workers. Yet they accomplished the exact opposite. They made EVs unaffordable, supply chains impossible to manage, and infrastructure fatally incomplete. Until American leadership acknowledges that ideological purity and economic reality are not synonymous, this trend will persist. American EV production is not deceased, but it is no longer in a position of leadership. The batteries that will power the future are being manufactured in Ontario. The vehicles are being assembled in Windsor. The charging networks are being built across Quebec. And the workers who believed in the electric revolution are learning a painful lesson. Even the industries of tomorrow can and will relocate when governments make them impossible to sustain today. That is the central lesson of America's EV collapse. It is a lesson inscribed on every Tesla vehicle rolling off the production line in Canada, visible for all to see. But there is another worker whose story reveals the cascading, domino effect consequences of this industrial collapse. Someone whose job involved not building batteries or assembling vehicles, but maintaining the very infrastructure that made the electric transition conceivable. Meet Angela. She is 32 years old and worked as a charging station installation technician for a firm named EV Charge Solutions, based in California. Angela entered the industry 4 years ago, attracted by the promise of contributing to the clean energy revolution. Her job was to install and maintain fast-charging stations along highways, in parking lots, and at shopping centers. It was technical work demanding electrical expertise, problem-solving ability, and physical stamina. She loved it. Every station she installed meant more drivers could confidently choose electric. She was building the infrastructure of the future, one charger at a time. She earned $63,000 a year, had benefits, and was advancing toward a promotion to regional supervisor. When the Trump administration slashed the charging infrastructure budget, Angela's company lost 90% of its federal contracts overnight. Projects that were approved, funded, and ready to break ground were canceled. The company attempted to survive on private sector contracts, but without the foundational federal network, demand dried up entirely. Why would a shopping center invest in installing chargers if there were no charging stations on the highways leading to it? The entire ecosystem relied on that backbone network. When it disappeared, the private market evaporated too. In August, EV Charge Solutions laid off 70% of its workforce. Angela was among them. She received 8 weeks of severance and a formal letter thanking her for her service. Angela searched for work within the EV sector. Nothing was available. The few charging companies still operating were not hiring. She contemplated moving to Canada, where charging infrastructure expansion was booming, but her elderly parents lived in California and relied on her for support. Relocation was not an option. So Angela accepted a position as a residential electrician, work she was qualified for, but which paid $42,000 a year, a 33% reduction in her income. Every day, driving past the half-completed charging station she had begun installing months prior, she felt the loss not merely of income, but of purpose. She had been building something significant, something that mattered for the future. And now that work had simply ceased. The ripple effects extend even deeper into communities most people never associate with the EV industry. Tesla dealerships and service centers across the United States are shutting their doors. When sales drop by 60%, dealerships cannot remain solvent. Small towns that had celebrated the arrival of a Tesla showroom, viewing it as a symbol of progress and modernity, now have empty storefronts bearing "for lease" signs. The technicians who serviced electric vehicles, highly trained specialists in high-voltage systems and battery diagnostics, are finding their skills becoming obsolete as the fleet of vehicles they were trained to maintain stops growing. Some are retraining to work on gasoline vehicles, a technological step backward. Others are leaving the automotive industry altogether. Meanwhile, Canadian communities are undergoing the opposite transformation. Small towns in Ontario that had endured economic stagnation for decades are suddenly thriving. Communities like Oakville, Oshawa, and Cambridge are constructing new schools, expanding hospitals, and investing in parks and recreational facilities, all funded by tax revenues generated by battery plants and vehicle assembly operations. Young people who once felt compelled to move to Toronto or Vancouver for opportunity are now able to stay in their hometowns because high-quality jobs are available locally. The demographic decline that had plagued rural and small-town Canada is beginning to reverse. Partnerships with Canadian firms, viewing Canada as a stable, predictable gateway to the North American market. The message being broadcast to the world is unambiguous. America's electric vehicle sector is unreliable, subject to political whims that can dismantle entire industries overnight. Canada, by contrast, is stable, committed, and decisively open for business. Once this perception solidifies in the minds of international investors, reversing it becomes a Herculean task. The vehicles manufactured on Canadian assembly lines represent not just jobs and technological innovation, but tangible, measurable progress toward a more livable planet. America, meanwhile, is watching its own emissions reduction targets slip further and further out of reach.